Now we present two important concepts in economics: ceteris paribus and building a model. Now, ceteris paribus and building a model have gained a great deal of attention in economics. What do we mean when we say ceteris paribus? Ceteris paribus is a Latin term which means everything else is the same or nothing else changes. So, with this term or with this assumption, we can clearly indicate what we believe is the right relationship between two variables. To illustrate this, let me give this example in order to illustrate how we apply the concept of ceteris paribus. Let's say ceteris paribus. Let's say we give this example. When the tuition of going to college increases by 100%, fewer students go to college. Dot. So the statement is when the tuition of going to college increases by 100%, fewer students go to college. Now this statement, as it is here, is a challenge because somebody might say, well, wait a minute, the tuition has gone up 100%, but my father's salary has gone up 200%. Therefore, the increase in the tuition by 100% won't affect me. I will still go to college. Another students might say, well, wait a minute, still this statement doesn't make sense to me. Does not affect me. Why? Because as you can see, the tuition has gone up 100%, but my father has won a lottery of $100,000. Therefore, the increase in the tuition did not have any effect on me going to college. A third person might say, and might challenge this statement and say, well, yes, indeed, the tuition has gone up 100%, but my father gained an inheritance of $200,000. Therefore, this statement won't affect me. I will still continue to go to college. However, if we change this statement and add ceteris paribus, instead of having a dot over here, we would comma and say ceteris paribus. Dot. So now the statement reads as follows. When the tuition of going to college increases by 100%, fewer students go to college, ceteris paribus. Now, we change everything. Now we have some restriction here. Now we are not allowing, the wage of one of the students to go up. We did not allow the other student's father to win a lottery. We did not allow the other or the third student's father to gain an inheritance. Everything else is the same. No changes. No changes. Therefore, here we are talking about tuition, two variables. Tuition has gone up, and then fewer students, go to college. Because now, with the use of ceteris paribus, we did not allow any change in the other variables. So we only kept a relationship that consists only of two variables. Now we move to discuss the second concept, which is building a model or a theory. This concept receives a great deal of attention in economics. Usually people build models whenever they don't know the answer of something. In practice, most economists use the term model and theory to indicate the same thing. That is, a model or a theory are used interchangeably. What actually do we mean when we say economic models? Economic models are defined as abstractions or simplification of a certain aspect of the real world. The key word here is abstractions, which means to omit or delete certain factors or some factors when trying to explain a certain phenomenon. To understand exactly how economists build models, let's give a small example. Say firm XYZ is having a problem selling its product. So now the economist will build a model to explain why this firm is having a problem selling its product. Suppose the economist believes that factors A, B, C, D, and E are candidate of explaining why the firm XYZ is having a problem selling its product. So factors A, B, C, D, and E are candidates of explaining why the firm is having a problem selling its product. So he looks at these factors and believes, after investigating these factors, that factors D and E greatly explain why the firm is having a problem selling its product, while the other factors A, B, and C slightly or do not explain why the firm is having a problem selling its product. So he focuses upon the factors D and E and neglect the other factors A, B, and C. Why? Because they are irrelevant to the model. So his model eventually will be built on these two factors D and E, while the other factors are ignored. A model also can be described with a variety of ways. It can be described with words. Also, it can be described with graphs. It can be described with algebra, equations, or it can be described with calculus. Let's illustrate a certain model, the law of demand. The law of demand, as you can see, we can describe this model with words. By saying the higher the price of a good or a service, the lower is the quantity demanded. Ceteris paribus. This is describing this law, the law of demand, by word. We can describe the law of demand graphically. Let me erase here and see how we can describe this law graphically. We can describe this law, the law of demand, graphically as this is. This is the y-axis or the vertical axis, okay? And then we have the x-axis. Along the x-axis, we label the quantity, because the law of demand relates two factors or two variables, the price in one hand and the quantity on the other hand. So here we have, along the vertical axis, we have the price of the good, and along the horizontal axis or the x-axis, we have the quantity. So we can basically describe this law graphically by graphing this. This is the law of demand. This is the demand curve. As you can see here, whenever the price increases from A to B, whenever the price increases from A to B, then the quantity, of course, will decrease from A prime to B prime. So this is describing the law of demand graphically. Also, we can describe this model, the law of demand, algebraically, like this. Since the law of demand shows an inverse relationship or a negative relationship between the price and the quantity demanded, so we can describe this law algebraically as follows. So QD is equal A minus B, P. This is describing the law of demand or the equation of demand algebraically, where, as you can see, quantity demanded, there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded, where QD is quantity demanded, and P is price per unit. Economics distinguishes between two types of statements: what is statements and what ought to be statements. Therefore, let's put here economics So we have what is a statement and what ought to be statements. As you can see, we have two types of statements: what is statements and what ought to be statements. What is statements are called positive statements. these statements can be tested. These statements might be right or wrong. Let's give an example of a positive statements. An example. The United States is the biggest economy in the world. Now, if you look at this statement, we can see that this statement might be right or wrong. Also can be tested by checking it against the facts. Now, we can find the GDP, the gross domestic product of the United States, and compare its GDP with the GDP of other countries. If we find that the GDP of the United States is the biggest, then we can say that the United States is indeed the biggest economy in the world. So it's a positive statement. What about normative statements? What ought to be statements are called normative statements. Normative statements deals or depends on value judgment. They cannot be tested. Let's put here, let's give an example. Normative statements, as I said, cannot be tested, and it deals or depends on value judgments. Let's give an example. The poor individuals in any country, let's say in the United States, ought to have a free access to health care. Now, this statement, as you can see, depends on a value judgment. These statements cannot be tested. It depends or it expresses an opinion, a point of view. This is the point of view maybe of a senator or anybody. Somebody else might have a different opinion than this. He might say, no, I don't agree that every poor individual in the United States should have free access to health care. He should pay a part of the cost of going to health care. So it is important to realize that all normative statements can be resolved through dialogue, through debate. And about the positive statements, all positive statements can be resolved through empirical testing. Now we are to study the last part or topic in this lesson, the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics versus macroeconomics. Broadly speaking, economics is divided into two main branches, microeconomics and macroeconomics. The prefix micro in microeconomics comes from the Greek word micros. So, micro in microeconomics comes from the Greek word micros, which means small. So the prefix micro in microeconomics comes from the Greek word micros, which means small. Therefore, microeconomics studies the behavior of the individual economic entities, namely a household, a worker, a firm, or a market. A microeconomist might be interested to answer a question such as, how will the imposition of higher taxes in tobacco producers lead, or how will the imposition of higher taxes on tobacco producers cause a small or a reduction in tobacco production? So the question is, question number one, how will the imposition of higher taxes on tobacco producers cause a reduction in tobacco production? Now, if you look at this question, you will see that this talks about a small entity in the economy. Which entity we are talking about here? It is the tobacco producers. Tobacco producers are one tiny part of the whole economy. Therefore, this is a micro equation because it talks about a small individual economic entity in the economy, namely tobacco producers. Another question is, how many bushels of wheat can a small agricultural farm produce? This is also a micro equation because it talks about an individual economic entity in the economy, namely farm producers. We have hundreds upon hundreds of farms. Therefore, it is a small entity of the whole economy. That's why we call it a micro question. So microeconomists are interested to answer questions that deal with the small entities in the economy. Now, let's look by contrast macroeconomics. Of course, the prefix macro, let me erase here. Now, by contrast, the prefix macro in macroeconomics also is derived from the Greek word macros. So macro comes macro in macroeconomics comes from the Greek word macros, which means large. So from this, we can see that macroeconomics focuses upon the entire economy. It talks about the whole economy. Major economic variables talked by macroeconomics include inflation, unemployment, the economic activity in the country. A macroeconomist might be interested to answer a question such as, how does the increase in the money supply affect the aggregate demand in the economy? Let's write this one down. How does the increase in the money supply affect the aggregate demand in the economy? So as you can see, here we are talking about the entire economy. Aggregate demand, aggregate means the sum. So here we are talking, this question is a macro question because it talks about a certain variable that covers the whole economy. Another question that usually macroeconomists would like to have answers about it is that what causes inflation? Of course, inflation is not just a single price. It talks about the increase in prices increase in the whole prices in the economy. It's a weighted average of all of the prices of all goods and services. Therefore, it is a macro variable. So this one talks about macroeconomics. Okay?